The Salvar Empire had ruled the stars for centuries. They had crushed countless civilizations, enslaved entire worlds, and expanded their dominion without challenge. To them, war was just a routine. Every species they encountered had fallen the same way: fear, surrender, and destruction. So when they turned their attention to humanity, they thought it would be no different. The War Council gathered in the grand chamber of the Salvar capital ship, Eternal Dominion. Massive screens displayed Earth, its blue oceans and green lands spinning quietly in the void. The Salvar generals stood tall, their exoskeletons gleaming under the dim lights. Supreme Commander Vorik, the leader of the invasion force, stared at the holographic projections with an air of boredom. "Humans are nothing," one of his generals scoffed. "They do not have empire-level technology. Their fleets are primitive. Their defenses are weak. We will conquer them within a week." The room echoed with agreement. The Salvar had defeated enemies far more advanced than this. What could a species like humans possibly do? Vorik nodded, but he was not as convinced. Something felt strange. There were reports, small details buried within the data, that did not add up. Stories of human ships moving unpredictably, human soldiers fighting even when outnumbered, human colonies refusing to surrender even when completely surrounded. But the other generals dismissed these as insignificant. "Fear tactics," another general sneered. "They know they are weak, so they make up stories. Let us crush them quickly." A decision was made. The invasion would begin immediately. The first fleet, 1,000 warships strong, was sent toward the Sol system. The Salvar Armada emerged from hyperspace, their warships blotting out the stars as they surrounded Earth. Their weapons were charged, shields raised, ready for an easy battle. They sent a transmission to humanity, a standard message, the same one they had sent to countless species before. "You are now subjects of the Salvar Empire. Surrender or be destroyed." There was silence. The human response did not come through official diplomatic channels. It did not come from a world leader. Instead, it came as a simple message, appearing directly on their flagship's main screen. "You should not have come." The Salvar commanders laughed. What could such weak creatures possibly do? Then their sensors started failing. The Salvar ships, each one equipped with some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy, suddenly found themselves blind. Radar systems went dark. Targeting computers reset themselves. Communications between warships cut out one by one. It made no sense. "What is happening?" Vorik barked. His officers scrambled for answers. The fleet's AI systems reported that nothing was wrong. Yet, their warships, massive, city-sized behemoths, felt like they were floating helplessly. Then the first Salvar warship vanished. No explosion, no distress signal, just gone. Panic spread through the fleet. Ships tried to reposition, but their systems refused to respond. And then, one by one, more ships disappeared. No enemy vessels had been detected. No weapons had been fired. But the Salvar fleet was being torn apart. Then, a new transmission came through. This time, it was a video. The screen flickered, revealing the face of a human soldier. His expression was calm, almost bored. Behind him, a captured Salvar officer lay motionless on the ground. The soldier spoke one sentence: "You made a grave mistake." The screen went black, and the Salvar fleet began to disappear faster. The Salvar fleet was in chaos. Supreme Commander Vorik gripped the sides of his command console, his claws digging into the metal as he struggled to understand what was happening. This was impossible. The Salvar Empire had waged war for centuries. They had faced countless enemies, conquered thousands of worlds. Never had they seen a battle like this. They had arrived in the Sol system with 1,000 warships, each one capable of reducing planets to rubble. Yet now, their forces were vanishing into the void, one by one, and they had no idea how. No explosions, no wreckage, just silence. Status report. Vorik roared. His officers scrambled at their stations, but their screens were filled with errors. Weapons were offline. Shields refused to activate. Communication lines flickered with static. The fleet's AI reported conflicting information. Some ships were there, others were not. Some were moving, others appeared frozen in place. "Sir, we are being jammed," one of his officers finally reported, his voice shaking. "But it is unlike any jamming we have seen before. It is inside our systems." Inside. Vorik's stomach tightened. The Salvar had some of the most advanced encryption and cyber warfare defenses in the galaxy. There was no way a lesser species, a species as primitive as humanity, could have hacked them so easily. And yet, their warships were helpless. Then, the fleet's proximity alarms blared to life. Vorik turned to the main screen, expecting to see enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace. But there was nothing. No incoming fleet, no missiles, no capital-class warships moving into position. Just darkness. And then, without warning, the dreadnought Tyrant's Wrath exploded into a ball of fire ****. It was the first Salvar ship to go down in flames. The fleet had watched in horror as ships before it simply vanished. But now, there was destruction, and it had come out of nowhere. "We are under attack," one of the bridge officers screamed. "From where?" Vorik demanded. "I see nothing." Before anyone could answer, 3 more ships erupted into flames. The massive vessels, each one carrying thousands of Salvar soldiers, were torn apart like they were nothing. That's when the sensors finally picked up movement. Small, fast-moving objects. Too fast to be traditional starships. Too unpredictable to be tracked. They weaved in and out of the Salvar formation, darting between their warships like shadows. Vorik's eyes narrowed. Human attack craft. "Identify those ships," he barked. One of his officers hesitated. "Sir, they do not match any known human starships." Vorik turned sharply. "What do you mean? What else could they be?" The officer gulped. "Sir, the signatures do not resemble ships at all. They move like they are alive." The bridge fell into a stunned silence. That was impossible. There were no biological organisms in the galaxy that could survive the vacuum of space, let alone move like warships. But before Vorik could press the issue, a new message appeared on the main screen. A human transmission. It was simple. A single countdown. 10, 9, 8. Vorik felt a chill run through him. What were they counting down to? "Trace that signal," he ordered. "Find out where it's coming from." His officers worked frantically, but the numbers kept ticking down. 7, 6, 5. Suddenly, the lights on the bridge flickered. The ship's power dimmed. The hum of the reactors grew unstable. Something was inside their systems. The countdown reached 3. A warning flashed across every screen. "We 8 systems overridden. 2. Navigation control lost. 1. Then, everything went dark. Vorik felt his blood turn to ice as the Eternal Dominion, the largest warship in the Salvar fleet, suddenly stopped responding. He looked around the bridge, watching his crew panic as their control over the ship vanished completely. And then, for the first time in his long military career, Vorik felt true fear. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was in chaos, its officers scrambling to regain control of the massive warship. Supreme Commander Vorik could do nothing but watch as his once mighty fleet crumbled around him. The Salvar Empire had never faced an enemy like this before, an enemy that fought without warning, struck without being seen, and crippled an entire armada without firing a single shot. More ships were disappearing now, but the patterns were changing. Some vessels simply shut down, their engines flickering out as they drifted aimlessly in space. Others detonated in blinding fireballs, their shields and armor proving useless against whatever was tearing through them. Every attempt to counterattack had failed before it even began. The fleet's weapons refused to lock onto anything, their targeting systems displaying nothing but empty space, even as unseen forces ripped their hulls apart. The panic spread like wildfire among the Salvar commanders, their voices overlapping in desperate transmissions, pleas for orders, requests for reinforcements, demands to retreat. But retreat to where? They had no control. Vorak turned to his chief engineer, his voice sharp and demanding. Shut down all systems. Hard reset. If something has infected our technology, we must purge it immediately. The engineer's mandibles clicked nervously, but he obeyed. The ship's core dimmed, the artificial gravity flickered, and for a moment, silence fell across the bridge. But then, before the system could restart, the screens came to life on their own. A single image appeared across every monitor. A human soldier, standing in darkness, his face illuminated only by the eerie red glow of his visor. He didn't speak at first. He simply stared, as if studying them. Then, at last, his voice echoed through the bridge, calm, measured, cold. Your fleet is gone. The words hit Vorak like a physical blow. He bared his fangs, his pride unwilling to accept what was happening. We are the Salvar Empire. We have ruled for centuries. You are nothing but primitives. The human cut him off with a chuckle, shaking his head. And yet here we are. You came to conquer. You expected us to beg. Instead, you walked into the dark, and the dark has swallowed you whole. Vorak felt the weight of those words press down on him. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be prey. The ship suddenly lurched, its hull groaning as unseen forces took control. The screens flickered again, now showing the remains of his once mighty fleet, hulks of dead warships drifting in the void. Only a handful of vessels were still intact, but they too were powerless, trapped in a web of silent, invisible doom. Vorak clenched his fists, rage boiling in his veins. You will regret this, he growled, his voice shaking with fury. The Salvar will send more fleets. They will burn your worlds to nothing. The human simply smiled, as if Vorak's words were pathetic. Let them come, he said, his voice quiet, deadly. We are not fighting a war. We are teaching a lesson. And you are the first to learn what happens when you threaten humanity. The screen cut to black. Then, without warning, the eternal dominion, the pride of the Salvar Empire, was ripped from reality, vanishing into the abyss, never to be seen again. The void of space was eerily silent as the shattered remnants of the Salvar fleet drifted through the darkness. What had once been a 1,000-strong invasion force, powerful enough to subjugate entire star systems, was now nothing more than debris scattered across the Sol system. The survivors, if they could even be called that, were left stranded, their ships either disabled beyond repair or hijacked entirely. And yet, the true horror had not even begun. Vorak sat frozen in his command chair, his claws gripping the armrests so tightly that the metal began to bend beneath his strength. He could feel it now, the weight of something watching them. It was not just the humans. No, this was something else. Something hidden in the depths of the void, waiting for the right moment to strike. His officers whispered among themselves, their voices filled with uncertainty and fear. The Salvar did not fear war. But this was something beyond war. This was a hunt, and they were the prey. Then the lights flickered. The ship groaned as if under some unseen pressure, the very metal of its hull creaking in protest. One by one, his crew started to disappear. It was not an explosion, nor a teleportation effect. They simply vanished. A flicker, a distortion in the air. And then they were gone. No screams, no struggle, just empty uniforms left behind where bodies had been. Vorak's breath came in ragged gasps as he stood from his chair, his mind racing for answers. What was this? The humans had clearly displayed superior technology, but this was something else entirely. Were they wielding weapons beyond the understanding of the Salvar? Or was there something worse lurking in the darkness? Something humanity had unleashed against them? The monitors flickered to life again, but this time, they displayed no human soldier. Instead, it was a collection of data logs, recordings of the Xalvar's own war crimes, planets they had razed, species they had enslaved, entire civilizations wiped from history. Every atrocity, every monstrous act, laid bare for all to see. A distorted voice spoke through the ship's intercom. "This is what you are." The words sent a chill through Vorek's body. "You believed yourselves to be conquerors. You thought war was a game. But you never understood the cost. You never imagined you could be the ones hunted." The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift, and Vorek felt something brush past him. Something invisible. He whirled around, his claws ready to strike, but there was nothing there. His officers were vanishing faster now, their presence erased from existence, until only he remained. The screen changed again, displaying a single phrase. "CONCQUENCES AAV arrived." Suddenly, the ship lurched forward, its engines roaring to life, but Vorek had not given any commands. He stumbled, gripping onto the console, watching in horror as the navigation systems locked onto a set of unknown coordinates. The ship was being taken somewhere, dragged into the abyss. He pounded on the controls, trying to override whatever force had seized the vessel, but it was useless. The final transmission played, the last message that Xalvar Empire would ever hear from its once great fleet. A whisper, cold and unforgiving. "You thought this was just another war. You were wrong." And then, with a final burst of energy, the Eternal Dominion was pulled into the unknown, swallowed by the darkness, leaving nothing behind. The Eternal Dominion was no longer in known space. Vorek didn't know where they had been taken, but the ship's systems refused to answer him. The navigation logs were empty, as if they had been erased mid-transit. No stars, no planets, not even a single speck of light outside the viewport. Just a vast, crushing darkness that felt alive. His remaining officers, only a handful now, stood frozen at their stations, too afraid to speak. The air felt heavy, charged with something unnatural. Every instinct in Vorek's body screamed that he was somewhere he was not meant to be. And then the whispers began. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the hum of failing consoles. Then they grew louder, a chorus of voices speaking in a language he did not understand. It wasn't just sound, it was inside his mind. His officers staggered back, clutching their heads, their mandibles clicking in distress. One of them, his chief strategist, Kivlik, let out a strangled sound before his body simply collapsed into dust. No scream, no resistance, just gone. The others recoiled in horror, but Vorek could not move. His body felt anchored to the spot, his breathing shallow. The ship's screens flickered again, and this time, the face that appeared was not that of a human soldier. It was something else. A silhouette, bathed in crimson light, its shape vaguely humanoid but wrong, as if humanity itself had been reshaped by war into something unrecognizable. Its eyes, if they were eyes, burned with a cold, inhuman calculation, and when it spoke, the voice did not match the face. It was layered, as if countless voices were speaking at once. "You came to burn our world." The words echoed through the ship, vibrating through the very walls. "You believed we were weak. You believed war was simple. And now you are here." Vorek forced himself to speak, though his voice was hoarse, his throat dry. Where have you taken us?" The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, the ship's lights dimmed further, the shadows deepening into something tangible, something that moved. Then the voice came again. "To the place where your kind belongs, a graveyard for those who thought themselves invincible." The shadows shifted, and outside the viewport, the darkness began to part. Vorek's breath caught in his throat. There, floating in the void, were ships, hundreds, thousands of them. Not just Xalvar vessels, but warships from dozens of empires. Some were still intact, frozen in eerie silence. Others were broken, shattered remains drifting endlessly. All of them were dead. A realization struck Vorik like a hammer. This was not just an execution. This was a warning. A place where all who had dared to challenge humanity had been cast into the abyss, never to be heard from again. The Salvar Empire had sent its greatest fleet to conquer a primitive race. Instead, they had been erased from history. Vorik's knees buckled, and he collapsed into his chair. His species, his empire, his people, they would never even know what had happened. No distress signals, no escape. They were already gone. The figure on the screen leaned forward, its glowing eyes piercing through the screen. You are not the first to challenge us, and you will not be the last. But every fool who comes here learns the same lesson. The ship began to shake violently, its very structure breaking apart. There is no war with humanity. There is only survival or oblivion. And with that, the transmission cut to black. The last thing Vorik saw before the darkness consumed him was the countless wreckages of those who had challenged the deadliest species in the galaxy. And lost. Vorik had believed in war. He had studied it, mastered it, and led countless campaigns that crushed entire civilizations beneath the might of the Salvar Empire. But now, as he sat alone in the flickering darkness of his ship's bridge, he realized something horrifying. He had never truly understood war. Not the way the humans did. Not the way they had been forced to. His empire had conquered species who surrendered the moment their fleets fell. But humans? They never surrendered. They adapted. They endured. They turned war into something else entirely, something their enemies did not survive. And now, Vorik was staring into the abyss that awaited those who had underestimated them. The graveyard of ships drifted silently outside the viewport, a massive graveyard of empires that had once been mighty, before they had challenged humanity. The eternal dominion trembled as unseen forces pulled it deeper into the void. Vorik no longer tried to fight back. What was the point? The weapons, the engines, even the very structure of the ship, it was all meaningless. The Salvar had come to conquer. Instead, they had ceased to exist. The remaining officers were gone now. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle. They had simply vanished, consumed by something far beyond his understanding. And then, the screen flickered back to life. The human soldier appeared again, his armor stained with the echoes of countless battles. His visor reflected nothing but darkness. His stance was relaxed, confident, the stance of a warrior who knew his enemy was already defeated. "You should have known," he said. "You had the records, the warnings, the histories of those who tried before you. And yet, you still thought you were different." Vorik could not respond. His throat was dry, his voice stolen by the overwhelming weight of realization. The soldier tilted his head slightly, as if studying him. "Did you think we would fight you like the others did?" The ship's lights flickered again. The metal groaned as the hull twisted unnaturally, as if it were being reshaped by something unseen. The soldier's voice remained calm, but beneath it, there was something else, something cold. "You called us a primitive species. You believed we were weak, that we were not ready for war. But we never fought for conquest. We never fought for power. We fought to survive." The ship jolted suddenly, the artificial gravity flickering. Vorik was lifted from his seat for a brief moment before crashing back down. Something was pulling the ship apart. The soldier continued. "You were never fighting humans. You were fighting what made us. The history of war is written in our blood. We did not start it, but we finished every single one." Outside, the graveyard of ships began to shift. The wreckages, the remains of once mighty war fleets, started to move as if something was waking up. The black void pulsed, ripples of unseen energy distorting the space around them. This was not just a graveyard. This was something else. A place of judgment. A place where humanity's enemies disappeared. The screen crackled with one final message. "This is where you stay now." And then the lights died. The ship's systems shut down entirely. Silence. Cold. Nothing. Vorak opened his mouth, trying to scream, trying to beg for mercy, but there was no one left to hear him. The Eternal Dominion was no longer a warship. It was a tomb. Just another wreckage. Another warning to those who dared to make the same mistake. The Eternal Dominion no longer responded. Its systems were dead. The ship that had once led the Xalvar Empire's most powerful invasion fleet was now nothing more than a lifeless husk, drifting silently among the countless wreckages of those who had come before. Vorak sat in the command chair, staring blankly at the dark screens before him. He could still feel the weight of the human's words, echoing in his mind. This is where you stay now. No threats, no anger, just a simple, undeniable truth. The graveyard of ships outside seemed to expand endlessly, stretching beyond anything he could comprehend. Some of the wrecks were ancient, their hulls rusted and broken, their origins unknown. Others were newer, vessels from empires that had once stood tall in the galaxy, only to be swallowed by this place. By them. By humanity. He had always thought of humans as lesser beings, a species that had only recently begun to step into the stars. How wrong he had been. They had not merely survived their wars. They had become war itself. The silence on the bridge was suffocating, pressing down on him like an invisible force. His officers were gone, erased. The ship was trapped, unmoving. And then the whispers returned. Soft at first, like distant echoes in the void. But they grew louder, clearer. Voices, so many voices. They spoke in tongues he could not understand, yet somehow he knew what they meant. He was not the first to sit in that chair, staring into the abyss, realizing the truth far too late. A low hum vibrated through the ship, and for a brief moment, the systems flickered back on. Vorak's heart pounded as he saw a transmission. One last message. The same human soldier, standing tall, visor reflecting nothing but the void. War is not about power, the soldier said, his voice steady. It's about what you are willing to lose. We lost everything once. We made sure it never happened again. The transmission ended. The screens went black. The ship lurched suddenly, a final, violent tremor shaking its very core. Vorak barely had time to react before everything around him began to shift. The metal groaned as the ship started to break apart, piece by piece. He gripped the armrests of his chair, but there was nothing to hold on to. The walls, the floor, everything was unraveling, dissolving into the darkness. He tried to scream, but the sound never came. The last thing he saw before the void consumed him entirely was the fleet of human warships, watching silently from a distance. They had never left. They had never needed to. The Xalvar had been dead from the moment they started this war. And then Vorak, the Eternal Dominion, and the Xalvar's greatest fleet were gone, erased from history, like all the others before them.